100 years ago, long before television and mass tourism, there was only one way to see the world. Huge fairs were staged in every great city, bringing the world to the public. From Italian gondolas to African elephants. But it wasn't just animals and objects that were exhibited. Live human beings were put on display. These were human zoos. These exhibitions were not meant just as entertainments. They were masterminded by scientists and designed to demonstrate the superiority of the white race.
The average white man is stronger of limb, fleeter of foot, clearer of eye than the average yellow or red or black.
Human zoos taught the public that racism was scientific. This new science of race would inspire and feed the ideology of the Nazis, giving academic grounding to the 20th century's greatest atrocity. This is the story of the human zoos and their legacy, buried by history until now. Almost nothing is known about the people who were put in human zoos, but one man's story can be pieced together. His name was Ota Benga. He was a pygmy from the Congo. Ota Benga would pass through the hands of 4 of America's leading scientists: the anthropologist William McGee, the zoologist William Temple Hornaday, and Madison Grant, America's greatest racist and the author of Hitler's favorite book. But Ota Benga's journey to the human zoo would begin with the explorer Samuel Phillips Werner. At the beginning of the 20th century, Werner was one of the world's leading experts on pygmies. He'd even lived among them in the Congo. Scientists were also desperate to get their hands on the natives. At the end of the 19th century, academics were only just beginning to study humankind in scientific terms. This new science of anthropology saw human zoos as an opportunity to investigate humanity close up. Living labs where they could study all of the races in one place. One of the first American anthropologists spotted the potential of human zoos and set his sights on building the biggest and most popular human zoo ever, with more human specimens than any other. His name was William McGee.
McGee always had to do everything bigger, more showy, and just in your face, I am the best. He was a stubborn, ambitious individual, but he was also one of the greatest and most well-known scientists of the last century.
McGee's human zoo would be more than spectacular public entertainment. McGee had a point to prove to the public.
Those who know the races realize that the average white man is stronger of limb, fleeter of foot, clearer of eye, and far more enduring of body under stress of labor and hardship than the average yellow or red or black, despite the special proficiency along a few narrow lines sometimes displayed by the lower types and drawn large in travelers' tales.
Part of Europe's past will be exposed by one of the state's hottest choreographers in the latest Australian dance theatre production. The history of human zoos was revealed to young dancer Tom Fonwa while touring Germany, as Matthew Smith reports.
It's a sordid chapter in Europe's history.
But it wasn't just animals and objects that were exhibited. Live human beings were put on display.
On learning about human zoos while touring in Berlin 6 years ago, Tom Fonwa had to tell the story the only way he knew how, through dance. The zoos ran in Europe till 1945, with many believing the indigenous groups were the missing link between monkeys and white men, an extreme form of racism. Most had been taken by force or tricked into performing. It's especially personal for the Samoan dancer Fonwa, considering the indigenous groups who were paraded included Samoans, which Germany colonised early last century.
So I was shocked, and then digging into the sort of themes and seeing what happened, how people were exhibited, just the concept of a human zoo was, first of all, mind-blowing, and then sort of reading about all the finer details, which was really kind of horrific as well.
The placing of the boy in the cage with a monkey is an outrage. The Negro race in America has a hard enough time as it is in getting away from the prejudice that is closely related to the monkey without having a member of the race placed on exhibition.
Leading men of science from Harvard and Princeton and Columbia University were saying that Africans were midway between an orangutan and a human being. So 100 years later, it should not come as much of a surprise that many people still cling to these notions of European superiority, African inferiority.
Was 1859. 3 months after Charles Darwin published his book On the Origin of Species, American promoter P.T. Barnum unveiled a new attraction at his popular museum in New York City. It featured what was described as the What Is It, or man monkey. Visitors were told that the creature had been captured by hunters in Africa, who discovered a race of beings roving among the trees and branches like apes and monkeys. Museum staff declared that the creature had been pronounced by scientists as a connecting link between African blacks and lower animals. In reality, Barnum's so-called man monkey was an African-American man named William Henry Johnson. Thanks to Barnum, Johnson spent much of his life on public display as an evolutionary missing link, sometimes in a cage. Many reporters at the time were happy to promote the deception. The New York Tribune declared that Barnum's performer seemed to be a cross between an ape species and a Negro, while another paper declared,
"The head is shaped like that of a monkey, but the face is more like that of an African Negro of the lower order. It has been pronounced by naturalists as a specimen of the connecting link between man and monkey."
Many more supposed missing links were marketed to the public at freak shows throughout America. In the 1880s, there was Crow, promoted as living proof of Darwin's theory of the descent of man. She was described as a perfect specimen of the step between man and monkey. Actually, Crow was a young woman from Southeast Asia who suffered from hypertrichosis, a rare genetic condition that produces excessive hair. In the early 1900s, there was Congo, the ape man, usually exhibited in a cage next to a chimpanzee. Most of these early presentations of missing links were crude hoaxes put forward by hucksters, not scientists. But the quest to dramatize the lower stages of human evolution eventually reached far beyond freak shows. It ultimately involved the most elite members of the scientific community, and it was given a platform at one of the most celebrated events in early 20th century America. Today, Forest Park in St. Louis is a place for walking, or riding a bicycle, or spending a quiet Sunday afternoon. But more than a century ago, it was one of the most visited locations in the entire United States, the site of the 1904 St. Louis World's Fair. Attracting more than 19 million visitors, the World's Fair was known for its lavish neoclassical buildings, its 22-story-high Ferris wheel, and the public debut of innovations such as the X-ray machine and the ice cream cone. But the fair had a darker side. Organizers imported thousands of indigenous peoples from around the world to be put on public display in what was essentially a giant human zoo. Unlike freak shows, the Human Zoo in St. Louis was created with the cooperation of America's scientific establishment. The man behind the Human Zoo was anthropologist William McGee. One of the nation's leading scientists, McGee had already served as acting president of the American Association for the Advancement of Science. In 1903, he was asked to head the anthropology department for the World's Fair. McGee had grand plans of presenting the story of human evolution by displaying representatives of what he considered lower stages of the human race. McGee's plans reflected the ideas of mainstream anthropology of the time.
Anthropology was kind of founded on this idea of mapping civilization from the highest to the lowest, right? With the lowest at that time said to be Africans, and then you sort of move up. Leading men of science from Harvard and Princeton and Columbia University were saying that Africans were midway between an orangutan and a human being.
Like many scientists of his day, McGee drew inspiration for his ideas on human development from Darwin's theory that humans had evolved from ape-like ancestors.
Darwin's theory provided a template for categorizing Africans as biological inferiors. His impact created a bandwagon effect on many scholars on both sides of the Atlantic. Africans were demeaned with terms like savages and compared to animals. Admittedly, some of these comparisons were used before Darwin, but after Darwin, they increasingly took on the authority of science.
Darwin argued that the break in evolutionary history between apes and men came between Africans and Australian Aborigines and gorillas. In other words, he thought blacks were the closest humans to apes. German scientist Ernst Haeckel helped popularize the idea.
Ernst Haeckel was the leading German Darwinist in the late 19th and early 20th century. He corresponded extensively with Darwin, and Darwin recognized Haeckel's affinity with his own theory.
Ernst Haeckel also is known for his raving racism. And in fact, he had a graphic of the history of human evolution that, in very pointed terms, really embedded a racist view of human evolution. You had the Teutonic male on the top, the sort of the Germanic male, and then at the bottom you had some creatures that looked partly like apes, partly like Jews. He was also anti-Semitic. And in the middle, you have the transition from the ape-like creatures to the first human creatures. The ape-like creatures look pretty much like they're Africans. And the takeaway point that Ernst Haeckel had from this graph was that the difference between the highest human being and the lowest human being, the gap between the highest Teutonic male and the first human being that was just one step above the apes, was larger than the gap between the lowest human being and the highest ape.
At the St. Louis World Fair, William McGee expressed a similar view, arguing that scientists had now shown
the structure of the lowest humans more nearly resembles that of the highest ape-like animals than that of the highest humans.
Like other scientists of the era, McGee saw primitive non-white peoples as living evidence of man's evolutionary history.
The savage stands strikingly close to subhuman species in every aspect of mentality, as well as in bodily habits and bodily structure.
McGee was determined to use primitive peoples at the fair to dramatize for the public the different stages of human evolution.